The rain in Havenwood, Maine, always felt like a judgment, a cold, insistent whisper against the weathered clapboard of my house. 38 years I'd lived here, and the silence, the relentless gray, had started to burrow into my bones. I was Serafina Bellwether, a bookbinder by trade, specializing in restoring old volumes, a quiet profession for a woman who craved anything but quiet. My life was a carefully constructed series of repairs, patching up fading pages, reinforcing brittle spines. It was a fitting metaphor, really, for the way I'd been living, carefully avoiding any major rips or tears. Then the Reddit post hit me like a physical blow. A homeless woman, a young child, ignored by a bustling city. It wasn't about judgment, not really. It was about a simmering rage, a recognition of a truth I'd been desperately trying to ignore. The image of that little girl, huddled on the pavement, sparked something dark within me. It wasn't just pity, it was the realization that I'd spent my entire life meticulously crafting a comfortable, predictable existence, while others were drowning in chaos. My husband, Daniel, had vanished 5 years ago, swallowed by the same gray that dominated Havenwood. He'd been a fisherman, a reckless, impulsive soul who'd chased the tide with a stubbornness that matched the Maine coast. He'd left behind a small inheritance, enough to keep me afloat, but not enough to truly thrive. I'd used it to build a small business, a sanctuary for forgotten books, but it felt like a betrayal, a constant reminder of his absence. The anger wasn't just about the lost years, it was about the wasted potential, the unfulfilled dreams. And suddenly that woman and her child weren't just a tragedy. They were a reflection of my own stagnant life, a harsh reminder of the choices I'd made, the risks I'd avoided. I started small, donating to the local food bank, volunteering at the Havenwood shelter, a place that had, frankly, always felt like an inconvenient extension of my own loneliness. I wanted to do something, anything, to feel like I was actively shaping the world, even if it was just offering a temporary respite. Then came the update. The woman was a drug addict, a meth head, as some cruelly suggested. It solidified the rage, twisting it into something sharper, more targeted. I found myself researching, obsessively learning about addiction, about the cycles of despair and self-destruction. It wasn't about blame, it was about understanding, about confronting the uncomfortable reality that sometimes people make choices that lead to devastating consequences. The shelter staff identified the woman and her child. They were regulars seeking refuge from the storm. They were getting help. That's when the idea, insidious and terrifying, began to take root. I wasn't a violent woman. I'd spent my life meticulously controlling every aspect of my existence, but the thought wouldn't leave me. It wasn't about retribution, it was about disrupting the pattern, about inserting myself into their lives not as a savior but as a catalyst. I contacted the shelter, offering to contribute financially, a substantial sum enough to ensure they received the best possible care, the most intensive treatment. I framed it as a gesture of support, a way to help them break free from the cycle. I left out the part about my own simmering resentment, the desire to rewrite their story, to force them to confront the wreckage of their choices. I began to frequent the shelter, initially observing, then slowly, subtly inserting myself into their routines. I befriended the woman whose name was Maggie, a quiet, weary soul with eyes that held a profound sadness. She was polite, grateful, but there was a guardedness about her, a refusal to truly open up. I told her stories about Daniel, about the fishing, about the storms, carefully crafting a narrative of loss and regret. I wanted to see if I could trigger something, a flicker of recognition, a moment of honest vulnerability. Days turned into weeks, and I noticed a shift in Maggie's behavior. She started seeking me out, sharing snippets of her story, the accident, the painkillers, the spiraling descent. She spoke of her daughter, Lily, with a fierce protectiveness. I continued to contribute to the shelter, increasing my donations, subtly hinting at my own experiences, my own struggles with loss and regret. I started leaving small gifts for Lily, a worn copy of Anne of Green Gables, a set of watercolor paints, a handmade doll. I wanted to offer her a lifeline, a glimpse of normalcy in a life consumed by chaos. I rationalized it as compassion, but deep down I knew it was something more. It was a way to control the narrative, to shape her future, to ensure that she didn't repeat the mistakes of her mother. Then one rainy afternoon I found Maggie and Lily gone. A note was left on my table, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Thank you for everything, we're going to find a new beginning." There was no explanation, no farewell, just a note, a clean break. A chilling realization washed over me. I hadn't just disrupted their lives, I'd orchestrated their departure. I hadn't solved their problems, I'd simply removed them from the situation, a desperate act of control disguised as kindness. I felt a profound sense of emptiness, a hollowness that spread through my bones. The anger hadn't subsided, it had simply morphed, becoming more complex, more insidious. I realized then that my actions hadn't been about justice or redemption. They were about filling a void, about asserting some kind of agency in a life that had long felt devoid of meaning. The rage wasn't directed at Maggie and Lily, it was directed at myself, at my own passivity, my own fear of taking risks. I had tried to control a situation I couldn't understand, a situation that reflected my own internal chaos. I continued my life in Havenwood, the rain still falling, the gray still dominating the landscape, but something had shifted within me. I stopped trying to shape the narratives of others. I began to focus on my own repairs, on restoring the old volumes, on accepting the imperfections, the rips and tears, the faded pages. I realized that true healing wasn't about erasing the past, it was about learning to live with it, about finding beauty in the brokenness. The woman and her child were gone, a fleeting ripple in the vast, indifferent ocean of my life, and I, Serafina Bellwether, was finally learning to accept the silence, the solitude, and the quiet, insistent whisper of the rain. The revenge wasn't a solution, it was simply a temporary distraction from the inescapable truth. Sometimes the greatest battles are fought within ourselves.